The roaming mic for later, because I will be the first one, so I need to bring. Okay. Welcome. If you can start to settle down and sit down, we can try to bring more people in from outside. Do we want maybe to call people from out to say we're starting? Or? Yeah. People are still coming back from lunch, so this session is also streamed online. Welcome to the afternoon session of the OGP on the role of the private sector in the open government agenda and the open data agenda. My name is Benjamin Herzberg. I am from the World Bank Group, and I work on the topic of engaging the private sector in development. So I want to talk to you about the platform that we have today, and we will also be having a quite interactive session. And so first, I want to explain you how this session is going to work. I'm going to do a small introduction about the open private sector, what it is, what we want to achieve with it, and then we will have live demonstrations with 4 teams who are located right now around the rooms, where for 20 minutes you'll have a chance to go from each computer to the other, each station to the other, and witness a 5-minute live demo of a tool which we put forward together in the context of this open private sector platform. And every 5 minutes there will be a bell that will ring, and when you hear the bell, you got to drop everything and go to the next station. And so when it starts, you can each go to any of the 4 stations, kind of 4 group, and it works a bit like a speed dating session. I don't know if you guys have done speed dating. It was not invented by the time I got married. So afterwards, we will have a panel of speakers representing companies and initiatives which have implemented the kind of open private sector practices that we have talked about. And we have 3 distinguished speakers with us. I will introduce them a little bit more later on when we get to the panel, and representing 3 company and initiatives that are working on that topic. So let me start by talking about this platform and what we want to do about it. So our goal is to try to accelerate development and to make development works for all. But we know that we are dealing with aid budgets which are struggling to achieve poverty reduction. And those aid budgets are only going to go by diminishing. They're not going to grow that much. And so what we have to do is if we want to accelerate development and achieve our twin goals of abolishing extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity by 2030, what we have to do is we have to leverage funds for development which are already in the market. And so when we talk about aid, we always think about multilateral agencies or bilateral agencies trying to deliver aid somewhere. But there is a lot of money in the market in the private sector. And so the question is, how do we leverage the private sector to do development? And we see that there is a lot of companies which have started this trend. You know, in the past, companies used to do philanthropy, which is I make money with my company, and on the side I do a little project that I like. Then people started to do corporate social responsibility, which is I operate in an environment with my company, and I might create disruptions when I do that. And because I create disruptions, I'm going to use money from my profit to mitigate those disruptions. So I'm going to do work on social, environmental, governance aspects to make sure that my company does not create harm where I am. And it's kind of a trade-off, and it's kind of you're buying a license to operate. But there is something after that, and that's called creating shared value. There are practices that take the impact on the environment, social governance environment, and take them at the core of the business values and put new processes within the business practices that achieve 2 goals at once. They help the bottom line, and they improve the bottom line, and in the same time, they improve the development environment around the company. And a lot of companies have started to do this, and we have 3 companies later on that are going to talk to us about those kind of experiences. But the question is, how do we go from this creating shared value, which is a term that was coined by Michael Porter at Harvard, but some companies had started to do this, and actually the IFC, which is an arm of the World Bank Group, has worked a lot with companies by investing in them and at the same time doing advisory services with them to try to implement processes that in the same time that they improve the bottom line, they have an impact on sustainability, on governance, and on the social environments around firms. So what we want to do now is we want to massively scale those kind of practices. We don't want 3,000 firms to do this. We don't want 30,000 firms to do this. We want 3 million firms to do this. 30 million firms to do this. So how do we scale those practices? We can do that today through technology. Because whereas there's still the traditional approach to consult with firms and work with them through their value chain and trying to see where the improvements can be done in terms of cost reduction, risk reduction, that's also going to have an impact on development. There are also tools that companies can use within their business processes that will facilitate that adoption of a behavior. So what we want to do is massively scale those kind of practices. And we're building an online platform that's called the Open Private Sector Platform. And as part of that, we're looking at what are the behavior that companies want to adopt because it's good for their business process, their bottom line. And the first one is, as a company, I want to make sure I work with clean businesses. And especially if I'm a small company, because my risk, I have a high risk of not being paid, of dealing with a company which is corrupt, and I want to ensure that I work with clean companies. So to help that, we built a tool called the Open Company Data Index, and that works on beneficial ownership. And that's a topic which is very important to the OGP. You remember the announcements by David Cameron at the beginning of the summit yesterday. And so what we've done here, we enable people to kind of do due diligence in a click. So we reduce the cost of due diligence, and by doing that, we enable people to reduce the market for corruption in a way, because a lot of things with corruption is not just the corrupt companies. A lot of it has to deal with clean companies who deal with corrupt companies without knowing that they're doing so. Then we're working on a second topic, which is supply chain. As a company, I want to reduce the cost and risk in my supply chain. This is core to my business. And in order to do that, I've got to go vertically. I've got to have standards in my supply chain. I've got to make sure that the sustainability ratings happen. And I've got to try to control not only my supplier, but the supplier of my supplier and their suppliers. And it's very difficult to do. It's very difficult to trace things up a supply chain. And what we've done is we're working on putting out an open supply chain platform, some kind of a LinkedIn of supply chain information, where every company could go in, put their information, and we will demo for you in a few minutes the open supply chain dashboard, which aggregates all the information right now of the companies that around the world have opened their supply chain information. The next behavior that we're addressing is the one that relates to contracts, because as a firm, it's very important for me to access contracts in a fair manner and to make sure that I reduce the risk of disputes in the contract, future disputes in the contract I sign. And I want to make sure I'm in a level playing field with other companies as I do that. So what we are working on is looking at how contracts are being published in different countries. And we're doing this as part of the open contracting partnerships that you've heard about in other sessions during this event. But the idea here is, as a company, how do I access the contracts in a place? So now a lot of countries are doing machine-readable contracts and publish their contracts, but they're not aggregated. And what I want to do as a company is I want to know what are the construction contracts in this area, in those 3 countries? What are all the contracts that are happening in Ghana right now or in Nepal? And I want to be able to compete globally. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to put together a global database in the cloud for any government to be able to upload their contracts, and for the private sector to be able to come to a single place and access all contracts of all countries, something that we're still working on, and we'll show you what we mean. The next behavior that we are trying to look at is that as a company, it's very important for me to be connected to the people in my supply chain and to understand what are the social issues that they have, what are the needs that are happening, what are the demands at the bottom of the pyramid. And often it's very hard to do this. A lot of companies have kind of closed their eyes when they come to the informal sector. And it's like, oh, the cooperative, that's the end of my supply chain. But it's not true. There are people in the informal sector behind that are harvesting those beans and giving them to the cooperative. So how do we address those issues? How do we address issues in the textile industry so that at the end of the day, we don't have issues happening like in Bangladesh without the companies knowing that the condition in those buildings were terrible? And so a lot of companies now are trying to do constituent feedback and using those new technologies, the mobile phones, a lot of applications to get anonymous feedback from workers, and then they make business decisions on top, depending on the information that they get at the bottom. But it's a two-way street because they can actually send information to workers at the bottom, which might be sometimes pricing information, which might be training information. So it's a two-way street, and it has a lot of competitiveness benefits for companies to do this. So that's why we are launching the Beneficiary Feedback App Store, a constituent feedback app store that will be demoed to you by our partners. Lastly, companies, it's crucial for them to not operate in an environment by just being a victim of that environment, but to take charge and somewhat get involved in the policy debate to make sure that they improve the investment climate and that they actually also get together with other firms and cooperate. So we're working on putting together a public-private dialogue online platform so that companies in different sectors in any country could quickly create their online space and have dialogue platforms. There is a lot of knowledge on public-private dialogue already today, but we're trying to do this in a very online way using a lot of social media tools. So each of those components, they get together as one suite of services, and we will add more as we go along. But this is quite transformational because what we want to do with this is we're partnering with a lot of other people that are in that space of helping companies have a stronger impact in development. And we're building a lot of knowledge and a lot of learning resources. We're going to do those MOOCs, those massive open online courses, and distribute this to companies through a lot of means. One of them will be the SME toolkit of the IFC, which is distributed to a lot of people in a lot of countries where you have very low capacity and people are trying to get help on how to run their small businesses. And so we're going to have some space in there for people to say, these are tools that I can adopt today to manage my risk, reduce my costs, therefore have an impact on my bottom line, but by doing so, I'm also having an impact on the environment. And so we have the hashtag Open Private Sector, so you can use that hashtag to tweet on this station. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go through 4 online demonstrations. Those 4 online demonstrations, they're run with our partners. What we've done is to develop those technologies. We've partnered with a number of companies. So on the Open Company Data Index, we're partnering with OpenCorporates. You might have seen Chris Taggart in some of the sessions. I will be doing the demonstration. We have the company called Govini, who is here with us, with Eric Gibsey, who is the CEO of Govini, who is working on the open contracting platform, and he will be presenting together with Catherine Frauscher from the World Bank Institute, who is operating the contract monitoring partnership over there, and they'll be demoing some of those applications. We have on the open supply chain, the company Ecodesk and Robert Clarke and Nick Murray will be demonstrating the open supply chain dashboard. And we have on the Beneficiary Feedback App Store the company Keystone Accountability, and David Bonbright, who is the CEO of Keystone, will be demonstrating that platform. So what I'm going to ask you to do now is all get up and choose one of those 4 stations, and we're going to have 5-minute run out for each. For our friends who are online right now, what's going to happen is we're going to switch from a live feed to a PowerPoint feed. So if you're online, you're only going to see the PowerPoints of those 4 demos, but the other one's going to actually get the online demo. So I'm going to invite you to go each to one of those 4 stations, and we're going to have a series of 5-minute demonstration of each of the tools. Thank you. Thank you. The live feed is okay? Perfect. So thank you for being here. This is Xavier. He's from OpenCorporates. OpenCorporates is a company with whom we have partnered to develop the Open Company Data Index. What you see on your screen here is the index. What does it do? It looks at all the open company registries of the world. Actually, not all of the world. What we did is we started with all the OGP countries. And we look at all those company registries, and we say, are those company registries open? And we rate them on their openness. What does that mean? Let's take a company like Norway, for instance. When we go to Norway, we can see 6 ratings, and together they're 100%. Today, Norway has 70 over 100. What are those 6 ratings? We want to know if the company registry is freely searchable. That means that people can go online and look at that records of the companies and who owns them. Then we're looking at, can you actually take that information and license it, and can you take this information and can you download it and use it in a machine-readable format? So is it free to use? Can you get it? And all this. And then we see how deep is the information that you get into a registry. Do you get information about the filings, about the shareholders? Do you get the name of the directors? And with all this, you can get information about companies. So this is a single registry, right? Why do we want to have the registries open? Because one of the answers to finding information about beneficial ownership is that you can actually look into all the companies of the world. Imagine that all the companies of the world will be in one single big database, and you could do relational database information between them and create network maps. And that's what we've done. So for instance, let me give you an example. If I take a company like Starbucks Corporation, and I type their name in it, and I search for it, what's going to happen? I'm going to get a list of all the different Starbucks that exist in the world and that are registered. And I'm going to look at them, and I'm going to see, well, let me see the information about the Starbucks in the company registry of Washington. This is the US one in the headquarters. So I click on it, and what I'm going to see here is the exact information that's on the company registry in the US. This is a live feed from the US. There's just a bit intermediary because to translate the data, and it comes here on the OpenCorporates website. And what I see, I can see the name of the company when it was created, the name of the directors, and I can see a lot of information about it. But that by itself, it's great to access it. It's already a leap. But I want more than that. I want to mesh that with other companies. So what I do is I click on that button, and when I click on that button, I'm getting the list of all the companies that have a relationship with Starbucks. And the relationship can be because they're a subsidiary, because they're owned, because the director is in there, shareholder. But this is one way to look at it in a tree. But a tree doesn't tell you the true story. What you want to see is a big, like in Star Wars, you know, like the big Death Star. Like, what does it look like? So let's look at it. And here, this is a model which is based on kind of static electricity and gravity in terms of the algorithm which is behind it. It takes the information from the company and put it together and look at all the companies. So if you actually take your mouse and look at any of those, it's going to tell you which any of those companies goes to. And if you click on it, you're going to see that you will go eventually to that company records. So you can really track if the company you're dealing with is in a relationship with other companies. And it's very interesting because it helps you do due diligence, it helps you do research in a few clicks. No, you can even go more than that, and you can do other type of visualization. So one of the visualization that we've worked on is to look at where companies have subsidiaries or company in their network that are in tax havens. And you can see that, for instance, by going on the website. So far, it doesn't work on all the companies. This kind of the new visualization I'm going to show you now, but only on some. And it pulls the data from all the databases which are open, which is why we're doing the open company data index, so that we can actually give an incentive for the government to open their company registry data, because you want them to be open and accessible and deep and all this, so that then you can mash it up in one gigantic database. But it's not one gigantic database. It's just a bunch of links to all those existing databases. Like that, you streamline it and you can have it all the time. So some of them is not fully live, but it's something that gets updated every week. Some of them, we have to stop. So thank you for coming, and please go to the next demo, and I get the next group. Thank you. Meanwhile, the microphone will go to the next demonstration.
So for the webcast audience, we're now moving to the Open Supply Chain Global Dashboard.
So am I on this? Oh, hello web stream audience. Are we ready to go? Do you want to come in nice and close so I can show you this nice and closely? Are we ready to go? Ready to go? Ready to go? So we partnered with the World Bank to produce the Open Supply Chain Dashboard. If you arrow up a little bit there, Nick, you'll see our world map for carbon, energy, waste and water. We have so far 3,000 businesses participating who submit their own carbon, energy, waste, water data because their customers ask them to do so. And our target is 3 million businesses. That's what Benjamin's, who's a very, very ambitious guy, his target is 3 million businesses. If we click on profile, you'll be able to see what a profile looks like individually. This is a company called GlaxoSmithKline, who, along with AT&T, Verizon, and other very substantial businesses around the world, they submit this information and they change it whenever they want to change it. So when Glaxo have experienced savings in energy, for example, they post this automatically, and this will automatically come on anyone who is following Glaxo's profile. So it could be outside agencies as well as followers. So let's see how it actually works is if you flip that as a customer, and you'll see from Glaxo's perspective, this is what Glaxo asks of Glaxo's supply chain. Their target is 20,000 suppliers. They already have hundreds of suppliers who are already posting to this supply chain. And this information shows the breakdown in risk and governance in their supply chain live. So any supplier that changes its energy, waste, water, certification data, social KPI data, it's automatically reflected on Glaxo's live supply chain screen. Quite sensitive, so we're not going to dwell on it for too long, but they did give us permission to show it to you. The idea then, if you flip that to a country, you get a very similar picture. You get a dashboard for a country, effectively. So this one is for the UK. We're just going to click on the UK, where 2,000 businesses are already registered and using the platform. This is the total aggregate amount of carbon, energy, waste and water broken down into subcategories of businesses that are currently posting data. So any businesses that post data and post reductions, that country actually shows a reduction in that data. But at the moment we're collecting information, so that information will go up and up and up. Yeah. The idea per country is to ask you guys and ask for participation is to say per country now we want to engage the governments as we've done with the UK and the US and go in and invite the top 100 businesses from each of those countries to talk to them about the business benefits of supply chain dashboard, supply chain programming, because there are real quantifiable benefits of doing so, and to stimulate them to ask their suppliers as well, just as Glaxo have done. So that will get us to our 3 million figure. Total for the UK target about 100,000, which is by GDP is proportionate, about 500,000 for the US, 500 or 600 for Cambodia and so forth. And there are our targets. So we plan to unwrap that over the next 36 months. As I say, modest task, but that's the goal. So any of you who are interested in potentially putting forward your country as one of those early stage countries, then we'd really like to talk to you. We've talked to lots and lots of countries over the last couple of days, and it's working quite nicely. You might want to just click back to, we've got Brazil here as well, and you've got the table of participating countries already. These are countries within which at least 10 companies are currently posting data on this site, and it's just starting. So if there's less than 10, it's actually a little bit sensitive because the information is then potentially derived back to the company itself. So it protects privacy, and you can see we can break it down each country, and it's an evolving feast effectively. So we're moving on marking intensity, certification, and so on. So as you saw the Glaxo supply chain dashboard, you will begin to see country dashboards for organisations that are participating. What that happens is an increase in data transparency, which affects, therefore, what Benjamin was talking about in terms of bribery and corruption and transparency. So it is a business accelerator for to respond to the needs of OGP for the country itself. Does that make sense? Hope so.
Thank you very much. May I just take the microphone? Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. Okay, welcome everyone. I'm David Bonbright with Keystone Accountability, and I'm here to tell you about the Constituent Feedback App Store. So this, we think, is one of the most exciting things that's happening right now in the frontiers of business, which is really listening systematically, collecting feedback from those you impact, those you serve. You might say, wait a minute, business has been listening systematically to its customers for 50 years. It's incredibly good at it. There's whole industries that do this, the customer satisfaction industry, and you'd be right. Business has been really brilliant at learning how to create value with its customers and to learn their attitudes and to build off their attitudes. But it has not done that as effectively and is just beginning to do it with the people that are impacted along its supply chains, the communities that live around the plants, the workers who are making the products, and so on. And this is about a new generation of products and services and organizations which have arisen up just in the last few years, which are specializing in providing this feedback. And we've been able to identify, with the help of our partners at the World Bank, 183 of these, which we've put onto this searchable product catalog, thefeedbackstore.com, and we're launching here today with you. So this is its preview. It's beta. It's a little creaky. There's a lot of features that aren't there yet. You're looking at a prototype. Here's the home page, and what you're seeing here is that we've divided. If you look across the bottom here, at the bottom of the screen, you're seeing you can filter down to look for just apps and services that relate to designing or collecting or analyzing or closing the loop, or you can look for all of them. But let's just do a quick search. We'll go click on the catalog search, and the categories come up again. Everything in the database is now listed on our right, but that's too much. So let's say design, collection, and processing, or let's just say collection and processing. And let's say that we want to only look at text message survey platforms. We want to hear from people through text messages. So we get several pages, 3 pages of things that come up. And you can see some of them here on the right. And then let's click on one of them, TeleRivet, and this will take you to a quick sheet on TeleRivet, which tells you basically what's on the database about them, their pricing model, the platforms that they work on, the categories that they cover, and so on. And it's just the basic information, a rating on them. By the way, these are all fictitious. The rating piece isn't working yet. It's actual information about the organizations, but the rating element is not yet operational. So that's not an actual rating of TeleRivet by anybody. And then if you want to actually engage them, you click on Read More, and it takes you straight to TeleRivet. Okay, so how do people get on to the Commons? Well, the way that works is that let's go back here and go back to our home page, or how we choose apps and services. So here, this is essentially anyone who's selling feedback services it's an open system, and they can submit a product by clicking on this template, and they can fill it in and send it to us, and we'll just establish that they're for real, that they exist, and no more. We're not doing any due diligence and no quality controls. We're putting it, and then we put them up. And then at that point, going back to catalog search, the quality assurance piece is going to be done over time by the users, by the people who are using these companies. They will rate them, and that piece is yet to be fully built out. But it's really the key driver for quality going forward. And it'll involve star ratings, and it'll also have comments and detailed review forms. And we're also working with the Feedback Labs, which is a consortium of feedback specialists that we're one of the founders of, who will work with us to design kind of assessment quality systems, which we will then try to build into the feedback store going forward. So that's it. Any questions? I'm getting better at fitting it into 5 minutes here. If you know,
Most of the providers local, they tend to focus on one country or one region, or are they?
well, a lot of them are.
Providers that could serve a company across.
Yeah, many of them are. Most of them are actually internet-based, and so they would be able to. But that's a good question, because one of the filters that we have not put on there yet is geography, and we're going to add it. It's number one on our hit list to work on, but it's going to require conversations with each of these companies. So that's what we're going to have to do. We don't know yet. The financial model is to be developed. I've got some ideas about that. We could talk about it offline, but sure.
Thanks, David. We're now moving to the final pod here in the room. So for the web audience, we're moving to the Global Contract Database pod, and I will introduce you to the leader here. So, Catherine, can I ask you to introduce yourself to the web audience, please, and present to them as well?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Catherine. I'm from the World Bank Institute. We have some cards here. If you don't have one, pass them around. Welcome. You saved the best presentation for last, so we are glad that you're here. This is Open Contracting, and we want to show you 2 examples of how you can access contracts and contracting information online. As you know, often it's rather difficult, especially if you're based in a developing country, to access contracting information, especially in the field of extractive industries, where mining contracts go into millions and billions of dollars, but are often held in secret. So this website, resourcecontracts.org, is an effort to pull contracts that are currently publicly available into one searchable database. So right now it includes 113 documents from 5 different countries that you can search by country, by type of contract, by type of resource. And once you click on it, you will see the actual contracting document. That's a Word document, so you can search for it. And because some of these documents are difficult to understand, this website also offers understanding contracting terms, so some guides that if you need some help in reading them. That's resourcecontracts.org, and Eric will show you about another initiative that's happening in the US right now.
Thank you, Catherine. I am going to show you Gavini.com, which is a US-based company that collects contract data from about 91,000 different government agencies across the US in varying fragmented formats, normalizes that data and standardizes it, and then creates a set of analytics on top of it so that those contracts are easier to understand and more transparent. The example that I'm going to show you is a wind tunnel example. So I've searched on wind tunnel construction just as an example. The timeline at the top shows all of the occurrences of wind tunnel construction projects over time across the U.S. The heat map shows where those projects have occurred state by state in the U.S. I can drill into the states and look at those projects by county, by city, by congressional district if I'd like to. I have a list of currently open wind tunnel contracts that are actionable today. And I have a historic list of every wind tunnel contract in time that's happened for the last 10 years. I look at those things by industry. I look at all of the government agencies, the federal agencies, the state agencies, the municipal agencies that have let those projects and spent money on wind tunnel projects. And I look at all the companies that have won those projects. The example that I'll show you, this is a list of all the wind tunnel projects. I'll click on one just to show you the specific wind tunnel project. These are the project details, solicitation numbers, contract numbers, the specific contract value, the place of performance of that contract. It's led by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the U.S., a federal agency. I can look at the contract history on a timeline to see how that contract occurred. I can look at a series of analytics for the spending analysis of those contracts. In addition, I can look at all the documents that are associated with that contract. And just by way of example, for detail, I can look at the blueprints that are associated with that contract down to that level that the engineer has provided and spec'd. In addition to that, if I'm interested in even more transparency on the private sector side, and I want to look at the company that won that $1.2 million contract. In this case, it's called Patriot Construction. I have a history of every contract Patriot Construction has won in the U.S. for the last 10 years. I can look at how they've captured those contracts, who's won them. I have all the contact information of everyone at Patriot Construction. Additionally, I can look at the corporate hierarchy of Patriot Construction to see if they've won contracts through subsidiaries over time that may be named differently than the parent organization, and how much those dollars, how many of those dollars were allocated over that time period. Questions for either of us? So the database is maintained on a daily basis. We have, that's our secret sauce. The premise of the business was a data manufacturing platform that goes out and collects that data every hour of every day, brings it in and normalizes it and standardizes it. We spent 2 years building the platform just to do that piece of the business. The front-end visualization is a layer, obviously, on top of that.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is the microphone on? Yes, okay. So welcome back to the people who were online and who were seeing the PowerPoint during that time. I hope that worked for you. We're going back to the live session now. And we're going to first thank the 4 presenters. It feels like they were selling apples and oranges or something, you know. There were a lot of competition between each of the booths. And so I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Nick and Robert from Ecodesk, Kai and David from Keystone. I want to thank Xavier from OpenCorporates, and Catherine and Eric from Govini and the World Bank Institute for making those demonstrations. Now, you've seen those very funky tools. I hope they're interesting for you. We're trying to really play on this open data and technology, which we think It really can be a great game changer for the role of private sector in development and scaling those kind of shared value practices that a few companies have started to implement already. And what we want to do now is actually go to those companies and say, okay, this is great, but what does it mean for you concretely? How have you done that in your company? What kind of sustainability, governance, social work you've done in your company, not just because it's good, but because it's good for you, for your bottom line. And so I'd like to welcome to the main table now our three panelists. We'll start with Nico Debenham, who is a director of Amarjao Trading Limited. Amarjao is a very large soft commodity trader, one of the largest in cocoa, if not the largest. And Nick has a long history of involvement on sustainability issues, but at heart is a hardcore businessman, so he will not do anything that doesn't save him a penny. Nonetheless, he is the chairman of the World Cocoa Foundation. So if you have questions about what chocolate is better to buy in the UK, ask him and he'll tell you don't buy chocolate in the UK. I'm joking. Then I'll welcome on the stage Dr. Chani In. Dr. Chani is the head of Akleda. Akleda is a bank in Cambodia, and Dr. Chani In came all the way from Cambodia to be with us today, so a special word of thanks. He co-founded Akleda in 1993. I included a full bio on the chairs, so you might have that. Akleda was the first bank in Cambodia to be rated by Standard & Poor's. It might be the only one still. I think it is still the only one, right? And Akleda has an amazing record of work on anti-corruption and social work with its workforce and with its clients, which makes it extremely solid as a bank. They're one of the first movers as well in Myanmar, which is the latest branches that they're opening now. So we're going to have a really great story from them. I will also like to welcome to the head table Mark Pfitzer, who is the head of the Geneva office of FSG. FSG is a consulting company that was founded by Mark Kramer and Michael Porter following their work on the Shared Value Initiative. And Mark is also one of the head of the Shared Value Initiatives, and he works a lot on this issue of trying to bring practices within companies that are great at doing cost reduction, risk reduction, and so on, but also have a good development impact and have good stories from there. So what I will ask them to do is to give us kind of a 3-minute statement about what they've been doing, how does this kind of agenda resonate with them, and then we're going to have a discussion, but the discussion, we're going to pick it up from the Twitter feed. So on your screen, you see now the Open Private Sector hashtag, and we're going to ask the people online to ask their question to the hashtag for the OGP, as a reminder, is OGP13, OGP13. And if you can add as well the Open Private Sector hashtag, you can ask your questions. We're going to have a live tweet. And Felipe Estefan, who is in the room right here, will feed us some questions so that the panel can answer those questions. So together we're going to spend about 40 minutes talking about these issues. So maybe we can start by Nico. If you can tell us a little bit about Amarjao, what you've been doing, how does that resonate with you?
Okay, 3 minutes is very short, so I'll try not to speak too fast, but to get as much information out as I can. We specialise in traceable and sustainable cocoa and coffee, and we have large networks of buying operations in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. What we are trying to do is be the link between farm and brand, and we are specialising in enabling brand managers to support their supply chain at farm level. So what we have developed is a system called geo-traceability, which enables us to understand the farmer's issues by collecting data at farm level, including farm sizes, community data, and agronomic data on the farm, which has enabled us to understand more about what the farmer needs and what assistance he needs and in what format. Using this mechanism, we're developing a farm business plan that each farmer can have, and then which then enables farm services providers, which we've helped set up, to then help those farmers in a specific way which generates a positive impact. And then the data that is collected from geotraceability is available to participants, which include donor funders, it includes the chocolate maker manufacturers. They can show it to their consumers, and obviously us, and the farmers themselves and the farmers' groups. Now, the way this has helped us as a business is it means that we've, at the bottom of our supply chain, we have got far more entrepreneurial, better off farmers, which are far better suppliers to our supply chain, and they're conforming to the requirements of the chocolate makers, and the coffee roasters, in the issues relating to reputation risk and brand value risk for them. And this information is held on a software, database software, and you can use the mechanism of the database to aggregate and filter the data and have an overall view as a brand manager or as a consumer of that brand. And you can go right down to individual farmer level, so an individual specific farmer can generate a understanding of his own farm. Many farmers, when we first started, believed their farms were actually 3 times the size that they actually are. So if they were buying fertilizer or inputs, they were probably buying 3 times too much, in which case they were not getting a return from those inputs. So what we've been able to do is to help them understand their actual business, their asset, which is their farm, the age of their trees, the number of trees they've got, and generating diversity of income, helping them to understand the environment that they're in and the community that they're operating in, and then helping them to develop their business around that and turning them from harvesters to entrepreneurial businessmen.
Thank you. And what I find amazing with the Amajaro story is that it brings value down to everybody in that system. It's not a question of Amajaro trying to, let's say, manage better the cost so they can squeeze as much as possible from the small guys at the bottom. That's not at all what it is. It's actually saving value and passing down that value to the bottom so that the quality of the goods are much better managed. And so when you're on top, you have a much better managed supply chain, which is a great asset in that market. And so it's a great story. I have to also mention that Amajaro is working with the IFC and has had investment in the IFC and some help from the IFC on that. And so it's a very fantastic example. We're going to come back to you, Nico, on that during the session answer. Can I ask the people in the technician room to put the Twitter feed on the screens, please? Next, we're going to go to Dr. Inchani from Akleda. So, Chani, you're also the vice chairman of the Association of Banks in Cambodia, if I'm not mistaken. So, it's pretty big, and you raised from a small, what was a small bank at the beginning, and microfinance activities actually, to the top of the game in Cambodia. And it's not an insignificant country financially. It's still growing, but and so how do all those kind of practices, open practices, how have you implemented them that enabled you to go so far?
So thank you, Benjamin. You see, when we start as an NGO for small and micro enterprise development, with the seed capital like $600,000, and then 2000 I became a specialized bank with the paid up capital of $4 million. We have IFC is one among the shareholders too. We have IFC here.
You started with
$600,000.
$600,000 in your pocket.
Seed capital. No, it's a grant fund from the donor. And then became a specialized bank in 2000 with the paid up capital $4 million. And then that's the time when we start, because we have IFC, DEG, FMO, those are foreign investor, invest with the bank, a specialized bank then. And then we have the other shareholder is the local, that's the NGO, and the employee association, which they own 51%. That's the time when I start to think, because when we look into the list of banks in Cambodia, then it's like 13 banks. Cambodian call ACDA Bank, a foreigner call Akleda Bank. And it is, we at the bottom of the list, and lots of competition in Cambodia then in terms of pricings, in terms of service quality. And then when we look into our shareholder, it's also different from the other shareholder of the other bank. So, and then we start to look like what can we do to differentiate ourselves from the others. And we look into the governance part. This is the point that we start to look into that first, because we want to brand ourselves as the bank you can trust. Asia Bank, the bank you can trust. How can we trust the bank when the bank have the shareholder as one major shareholder as an NGO? And then we start to see if we, in order to establish and trust the public, so we need to form good governance, no? So that the governance agree that we send the message out to the public in one common understanding. So we look into the shareholding structure, the board, the management, and the staff. And then we decide to form the procedure and guideline, but in the institution which allow the staff, management and staff, to contribute to the policy, to the guideline, to the procedure, but in the institution. So this invite participation from the staff. And secondly, we form the internal audit team, so that we can guarantee like a check and balance and make sure that we, the team, can like spot internal audit function, so that we can see what have done, what is the policy approved by the board and implemented by the management, if they carry on properly or not. No? So we look into this part, so that within the institution itself, approve for the transparent in banking and finance, provide information out to the public. So this is the one key thing that why we can lead one small bank to become the largest bank, because we provide information out to the public. Because in Cambodia, if we say provide information, what kind of information is related to the, like a statement, we post the financial statement quarterly, biannually, and annually, to the public, so that the public can see how we are, what is our financial position, who is our director, who is our management, how much we pay to our director. So this information in other countries is normal information, but in Cambodia it's like the first time it's like public information. When we look into the bank, they can Asia Bank, we can see this is the bank that they can trust, because we provide them information. Because to the customer, on the customer eye, 1,000, if they deposit 1,000, but the bank, it's their lifetime saving. So they like to know who are the shareholder, who are the director, who is the management, what we have done. So and then when we this one part on the governance part, on the service part, we work with all segments of the community. Not just a big customer. Micro, small, medium enterprise, all those are our customer. So these two things. So one is the customer is one side, and the governance is the other side. And then the brand and offices across the country, close to the customer, and none of the 13 banks operate outside of the capital city then. So we, Asia Bank, the only bank that have branch across the country, close to the customer, right in the community, understand the need of the customer, because we are with them, we talk to them, and then we start to expand electronic infrastructure so that the customer can have access on the 24 hours basis. So again, back to the question, how do we manage from small bank to the largest bank? Again, because of the, we call transparency in banking and finance, the right set of governance structure. We establish the trust, but in the institution, so that the customer can trust us, and then place their surplus resource with us, so that we can on lend to the other who need to have access to financial services.
Thank you, Chani. Yeah. And we'll explore during the question answers what you've done as well in terms of anti-corruption and the kind of high level of standards you put in terms of transparency and beneficial ownership with the loans that you actually give to the customers. Then let's go to Mark. And Mark, you've been involved in FSG as a company that helps other companies implement those type of practices. So can you describe a little bit what you do and the key learnings that you get from that?
Great, Benjamin. He asked me to talk about shared value and the shared value initiative. And a good place to explain shared value is to explain where it came from. And about 10 years ago, under the leadership of Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, we wanted to look at companies to really uncover what practices in companies led to extraordinary social impact. And what we discovered looking at companies that really provided solutions to address social and environmental problems on a vast scale, like Jain Irrigation in India, providing drip irrigations to millions of farmers, or like Novartis, providing access to essential medicines to over 40 million people in India, or Cisco, providing training for over 4 million youth in IT skills in over 100 countries. When we looked at these companies, what we discovered is that they really had shifted their paradigm on how they engaged in society. And we said they kind of shifted from sharing the value created, from doing business on the one hand, and then redistributing some of that value to address negative impacts of the business or to address community needs. And they had shifted from that to creating shared value, to focusing on specific issues, deploying the science, the innovation power of business to address these issues and in ways that improved the business. And by that, they of course created that virtuous circle between addressing social problems and funding the addressing of these social problems. And that's why we saw all of that scale, and we're so excited about it. And these leading companies, as Michael says, are really redefining the nature of capitalism, because they're defining markets not just in terms of economic needs, but also in terms of social needs. And they've elevated the purpose of the company to be really both about making society progress and deriving shareholder value. And even more importantly, they're linking that systematically, how addressing social progress, how making social progress is actually unleashing the potential for growth and productivity in the company. So Michael and Mark, in their Harvard Business Review article in 2011, sort of the seminal article on that, really codified how that happens. And I won't go in detail, you can read the article, but it's around products, rethinking products to meet unmet needs. It's about reconfiguring the value chain to basically drive labor and resource productivity in the value chain. And it's about investing in the constraints in society that are constrained to the growth of business, which are cluster deficits around the business. And by addressing these, you, of course, unleash the potential of the business. However, and I wrote about this in our last HBR article this September on innovating for shared value, we know that there's tremendous inertia of business in getting towards shared value practices. Part of it is lack of understanding and awareness, although that's moving very fast, and people like Benjamin are champions of driving understanding of that. But it's also because, perversely, legacy models are actually too profitable or too happy, or that companies are in crisis. If legacy models are good, why change? If they're in crisis, we don't have the resources to think long-term and to rethink our process of innovation and allocating resources to innovation to solve social problems. And that's basically why we created the Shared Value Initiative. It's a global community of practice among leading companies, civil society, and government. And what we want to do, or what we're doing with the Shared Value Initiative, is to really drive adoption of shared value practices and drive knowledge and understanding about it. And just to give a few highlights of where we are, we have 20 leading companies that are championing it. We have the Rockefeller Foundation. We have international NGOs like Mercy Corps or PATH being in the leadership council and sponsorship of the initiative. And we're focusing on several things. We are now churning out, and the aim is to churn hundreds of case studies of what's happening around the world in companies around shared value strategies that are yielding measurable business and social outcomes. We have a series of events. We have the Global Shared Value Summit that happens every year, and now that's breaking out into regional events, so for companies to get together. But we've trained already 50 consulting firms worldwide, and we're talking about firms in Korea and the Philippines, in Latin America, all over the place, to understand how to be good advisors in working with companies on identifying those shared value opportunities and on addressing that very difficult portion of the how. And we're developing and have developed an executive education curriculum that we're rolling out, either tailored to specific companies within the companies or on an open basis platform, and so on and so forth. The very other important element of this is actually research by industry sector, not just research, but actually involving leading companies by industry sector, and we have that going on for the healthcare industry. We had a great report called Competing by Saving Lives, which is shared value right there. Extractives, financial services is just going underway to assemble the best practices in shared value. And we have a great paper coming out on shared value in education as well. So that's just a few highlights. I think we're focusing on the management practices and the how, and what I see around the room here is kind of creating the transparency and the information to enable shared value to happen. So I think great synergy. And thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you, Mark. And the open private sector and the shared value initiative are trying to work together to bring that knowledge to bear and scale those kind of practices that we've heard about. Can I turn to Felipe to see if we have online or through Twitter some questions that are coming up that we could ask the panelists? I think we have a microphone coming up. And then we'll also enable people in the floor, of course, to ask questions.
Thank you, Benjamin, and thank you for everyone that has been participating in the conversation using hashtag Open Private Sector. We're getting a lot of good questions and would encourage you to keep posting those questions. We'll try to do our best to make sure that we keep answering even beyond this session. We have several good questions. I'm going to keep them to 3 so that the panel can actually answer them. The first one comes from Caroline Spruill, who asks, how can the open private sector movement fit into the larger open movement and build on the momentum of others? We also have a good question from Mark Ambassador-Jones that says, how can you get businesses to engage? Do you anticipate any supply chain resistance? And finally, we have a question from Diageo. Says, what role can the open private sector platform play in supporting Diageo and companies that share our ambition?
Okay, so let's start maybe with the one on the supply chain resistance, and let's bounce that questions to Nico, because when you decided to, as a cocoa trader, you're a commodity trader, so you're really on top, you're buying, but you also have positions down the supply chain, but you have a lot of people that you have less control from. You're just buying from them. And so how did you face resistance when you wanted to put those new processes of traceability and transparency in place?
Yeah, I mean, the resistance comes from what's perceived to be the additional work and the additional effort to generate traceability and transparency, especially in commodities like cocoa and coffee, where the average farmer produces less than a ton a year, and we buy as a business probably 300,000 tons a year. And therefore there is a lot of resistance at every step in the supply chain, where you're asking them to put a little bit more time and effort into ensuring traceability. But I think the key motivation is generated from the understanding. I mean, everybody understands the concept that there's more and more consumption of raw materials and food gaining pace over time. And at a point, from a commercial perspective, you've got to find a solution to this. And the solution can only be driven through a transparent understanding of the issues on the ground, and then implementing those and understanding that the beneficiaries of support, namely the products that you're buying from them, are the actual ones that have supplied you that product. So there's a commercial sense behind understanding where it's coming from and then supporting those people in improving their own productivity and also improving their own livelihood as a result.
So I'll ask you 2 follow-up questions from that, which is, one is, do you find different level of resistance depending on the capacity of the people to adopt new behavior? Because when you have someone who's been collecting cacao beans forever in one way, doesn't want to do it in a different way, doesn't want to bring it to a different reseller or something. And the second is you face competition in the market. You're not the only one. And so the people you buy from, assuming that not all of them have an exclusive relationship with you, does that mean that they have to adopt many different type of standards from different type of people, and be transparent in the supply chain from different people every time?
Yeah, we have no ability or no willingness to have exclusive supply with suppliers, because that in itself is a very unhealthy environment. So we have to perform to at a level that encourages our farmer level suppliers to want to supply to us, and provide them with services that encourages them to interact with us rather than our competition. One of the challenges is, particularly in cocoa and in coffee, is that there's a massive resistance to change, because the farmers themselves are generally at average age of about 54 to 60, depending on which continent you're on. They have got very old trees, and they consider those trees to be assets. And one of the key changes that we need to implement is to get them to understand that those assets are not producing anything for them, because they're too old, and that they need to start rehabilitating and regenerating. So how do you go about that? You've got to get down to almost tree-level data to prove to a farmer that that tree produced X many pods, and that younger tree produced 4 times the number of pods. So if you remove that tree, the old tree, you're not really going to affect your income, because it's not giving you income anyway. And it gets down to having to explain the logic behind the action and the benefits from that action. And then the resistance starts to fall away. But one of the reasons why we've gone to such level of collecting data is so that we can help the farmer to understand his farm size, his tree age profiles, his number of trees per hectare that he's got, his diversity of income, how he can improve his diversity, and then show him or her that if you follow these particular actions in that form of a farm business plan, these will be your benefits from it. And then one of the main elements, and I'm afraid it's not very efficient, but one of the best ways of pursuing this is by having demonstration plots, and then being able to prove that particular actions do have an outcome and a positive impact.
So maybe I'll go to Mark now to link to the question of what's the relationship between this and open data. Maybe that's one of the relationship, by actually using the power of open data to make the demonstration effect, because that's something we've heard a lot during this summit. It's like, oh, can we prove that transparency works and that open data works? And every time we get the same answer, which is, well, we have a large number of small stories. And it's kind of funny that when we're dealing with data, we can't create data that will prove actually the actual proof that it's working. But in that case, by agglomerating this kind of data, I guess that's a lot of practices that people are doing in terms of transparency of information and that big data agenda in larger firms, right? Mark?
Yeah, I was learning about your initiatives here, and I was really struck by how providing information can be a trigger to creating shared value, right? The information that of what the specific problems are is the starting point for addressing them. And with shared value, if addressing them is linked to your business economics, then you've got a very strong and lower resistance to invest in it, because there's a strong rationale for it. I was just struck by the link to open in general. Also from our shared value perspective, we talk a lot about this purpose I mentioned before. When the purpose of a company shifts from the what they do, making cars, to the why they do it, for clean mobility, or that what they do is to manufacture food, to being a health and nutrition company, the why. And that's happening globally, and that's the fundamental sort of shift that we're seeing, this shift of purpose and putting society back on the mission statement of company. Well, I think the starting point of open is this mission statement. If you're open and clear and authentic in your purpose, and by the way, you could build a technology platform to track all the mission statements and to rate them, because I think it's the starting point for this co-creation of shared value among all sectors. Because when we have a clear sense of outcome, and an authentic one, then people feel it. And other businesses who are going to work with Armajaro are going to feel it, and all the other sectors working with these companies are going to feel it, and they're going to know it. And then when you go beyond that to actually defining then the specific problems, which you're also enabling, then you have the whole machine underway.
And I guess this is true in banking as well, right? Chani, in terms of putting the data out there. And I'm not so much talking about the data about your own company, but the data about the loans and the information. That's a lot of data you have in terms of saying which loan works better in terms of repayments, the one where you do more due diligence on, the one where you do less, where you lend to women entrepreneurs versus men entrepreneurs, for instance. Is your company producing a lot of that kind of big data?
That's right. So internally, we have the system to track record on those customer, like include the customer who pay in time, pay very well, subsequent loan again, and this is within the company. And for the association, we also have the credit bureau data where we are the bank. I mean, not just my bank, all banks can have access to those data. Because the data, the information about the customer have loan with the other bank, like to avoid repeated loan. So this is the data that one is individually organized by individual bank, and the other is the data of the credit bureau, where the bank and microfinance association log into those information.
We had a question about the company Diageo and how that can work. We have someone from Diageo, I think, in the audience. Can you explain a bit what was the question? You have the microphone. We have to be quick because the time is up, and I like to have a quick round of questions before we go because
Thank you very much. I'll try and be as quick as I can. Martin Hatfield from Diageo. Diageo, for those of you who don't know, is the world's biggest premium alcoholic drinks company. We do business in 180 countries around the world. My question relates principally to bribery and corruption. We obviously have a very strong anti-bribery stance and policy underpinned by strong principles within the company and codes of conduct. When putting that into practice and living up to that in local environments, we've found that very often the best way to do that is to create partnerships with local companies, other multinationals perhaps, or foreign investors, with the local government, NGOs, development partners, and so on, to build up that sort of mass of support for the idea that you should resist bribery and corruption, because clearly it's an area where if you stand up on your own and say, I will not accept or give bribes, that's one thing, but it's much stronger when people do it together. In Cameroon, for example, recently we set up a thing, or helped set up a thing called the Business Coalition Against Corruption, which now has about 60 members, including many of our supply chain companies whom we invited to join, and that's really gathered momentum and has helped to fuel the anti-corruption movement in Cameroon. And we believe that that genuinely creates shared value in the kind of terms that you were talking about, Mark, because yes, it's good for us because it means that our trucks aren't getting stopped and asked for facilitation payments along the way, but actually our supply companies are now getting additional international business because they are seen to be companies which operate according to the best principles and best practices, and they are therefore seen to be trusted by other international companies who want to do business with them. My question really is, that's very much a sort of grassroots and local initiative which needs to meet the circumstances in that country. What's the best way that a big platform like the Open Private Sector platform can support that kind of local grassroots work?
So I'm going to ask one more question from the tweet feed from Felipe, but in the meantime, I think maybe Chanik will answer that, but I will just make a plug here for one of the products which we did not make a demo of today, which is the one about public-private dialogue, where we have at the World Bank, at the IFC, and in a lot of multilateral institutions, a lot of experience sponsoring this kind of dialogue at the local level to tackle policy issues, governance issues, participatory issues. And yesterday in the Bright Spot, you remember one of them was talking about, I think, was it from Estonia? The gentleman was talking about this kind of program that they've done. So what we're doing with the public-private dialogue platform is we will try to give the tools for the people to do this kind of dialogue in a more efficient way, and for companies like yours to be involved in that. And just before we go to Chani, can I ask from Felipe one more small round of comments, and then we'll take answers and concluding comments because we're being kicked out of the room soon, I think.
So this one is for Chani as well. It says from Zoe Smith, how does Armaggio select the countries in which it runs the source trust projects? And there's another question as well for Mark from @Catch London. What is the most common question potential participants ask when they're reviewing the share value initiative?
So, Nico, on the question about Armaggio, we'll go to Chani about the question about how you do anti-corruption at the grassroots level, and then we'll go to Mark, and that will be the concluding comments for the sessions.
So just to clarify the question, how do we choose which countries we operate source trust projects? Obviously, we're in the countries that we're operating in, because this is what I would call the ultimate shared value business tool in a way.
So what is source trust?
So source trust is a not-for-profit that we established to enable our customers, branded customers, to put funding into and then match it with donor funding to initiate projects and programs to improve farmer livelihoods on the ground.
Okay.
And then the geo-traceability is the data to ensure that the actions taken by source trust are the correct ones and they are impactful.
And this that links to the open data thing, so geo-traceability as well.
That's right. So the source trust is obviously a mechanism for the chocolate maker or the coffee roaster and Armaggio, and it linked to the bottom of those supply chains. So if we're operating in a specific country, then there will inevitably be source trust projects. So it's really based around our operation.
Great. Chani, on the how do you operate anti-corruption programs at the grassroots level?
So, thank you. So when we start, we have 28 staff of the NGO and then become bank staff. I explained
how much staff do you have today?
10,000 staff. So we start with 28. Paid up capital 4 million, now paid up capital 185 million, and total is at $2.1 billion. So shareholder equity around 450 million US dollar. But you see, when we start with small staff, I'm talking about the policy participation in policy development. So one is we talk about a staff policy related to working with money in Cambodia. They call like chicken. Lay egg in the barn. No? So we explain to staff to avoid criticism, what should we do? And staff give each statement. So we start to form the regulation for ourselves, for the staff first. Because the staff, the one who work with the public at large, deal with the individual or corporation or the company. So we want clean from our side first. So we establish the staff regulation, and later on it formed we call the labor collective agreement, which is which is work like zero toleration against corruption. So anyone bribe or take even a small amount of money, it doesn't matter how much, and it's not in terms of cash, in terms of make favorable decision in favor of certain person, also judged as corruption. So we asked staff to give the statement each, and then it formed the policy of the institution as a whole. And so we start with 2 pages, but now it's like a booklet. No? You just add.
So great example, and I will also mention that the Acleda Bank is also an IFC partner, and a great example of zero tolerance against corruption, and as you said, a great success. I mean, from 28 employees to 10,000, and now 2-point-something billion assets in just a few years. I think it's an amazing success, and I think the way it's grown, it's really grown by implementing at its core those kind of shared value practices in the financial sector. So you should use Acleda in your financial sector study, maybe a shared value initiative. What are the questions that the people ask when they want to implement shared value initiative? And can I add a twist to that? Are they interested in the feedback they get from the bottom of their supply chains in terms of what's happening with the workers, and a lot of pressures now as to child work, for instance, and bad working conditions?
Yeah, I'm going to take a look. I'm just going to respond to the corruption thing, and then I'll answer the question. I just think, just because it's such an important topic, because there are so many businesses that have that issue, and the examples of business coalition effectively able to change situations with conditions on the ground. Yes, it's shared value, and it needs. So there's a huge job to understand that and to use those examples to deploy it elsewhere. And OPG could be tremendously helpful in that. At a minimum, I would say, please submit a case study to this shared value initiative, or we can facilitate that because it is such an important problem. I'm going to be a little cheeky on the most common question, but it is really, it's actually the most common one is how can I be part of it? How can I contribute or capture knowledge? And that's the most common thing is how to be involved, how to participate in knowledge exchange. And I think there's lots of opportunities for that through the case studies.
Thank you. And I think what we've seen here are great examples, and the idea is like, how do we scale those kind of examples? What we've tried to do with the tools in the platform is to help scale that, sometime at a lower level of high implementation, but to enable all companies to participate. There is about 300 million companies around the world. Our target with these platforms is to reach 1% of those companies. 3 million companies in 3 years from now. And if you consider the amount of spending that there is from the private sector, not talking about all the financial assets, but the spending, we're talking about $30 trillion annually spent by the private sector. And we're asking what we want to do. We want to reach 1% of the companies around the world, and we want to try to influence 1% of their spending for every company that we reach. And by doing that, in 3 years, we believe that we can leverage $3 billion from the private sector for development, for money that they will spend anyway to do their business, but we want that money to be spent to do their business in a different manner. Because we believe it's time to not only ask what development can do for the private sector, but also what the private sector can do for development. And that's a way, by implementing those kind of initiatives, that we can reach our goals of eradicating extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. And I hope these platforms, this open private sector platform, will be one of the ways that people can use to reach this kind of goal. So I want to thank you, and I want please to give a round of applause to our panelists today, and to all the people that did our demos. And we're available in a coffee break to chat and to keep the conversation. And again, it's online streaming, so thank you very much.